Hi guys, welcome back to another episode of Sin and Tonic. Today's story is that of Daniel Young. This is a story full of failings. Frustrating. Let's go. Sin and Tonic! Back on the gin. Oh, I've missed you. Lovely gin actually today. It's the tonic is my favourite. It's a Fever Tree aromatic. I want to say aromatic duck. Aromatic something. It's pink and lush and aromatic. Yum. So cheers. Like I said, this case is one of many failings, and the vein was going strong. We are going to London, South London, baby. And our story begins in Kendall Gardens, which is a very pleasant, lovely looking park. Now, this particular park, Kendall Gardens, was a very popular sort of cut through. So there's a residential area all around, and on the other side of the park is, I want to say Mordor. Isn't that like out of Lord of the Rings or something? Harry Potter? Excuse me. Or, I don't know, I'm just making it up. I don't know. Mordor. I'm going to say Lord of the Rings. And Morden tube station. So you would go through that park to get to Morden tube station. On the 19th of January in 2016, a woman that was doing just that came across a very injured man laying on the floor in that park. So she made a phone call to 999 to report this, and that was at 8:07 a.m. Sadly, by the time the ambulance and the police arrived at the scene, the man had passed away. The park was closed and a huge forensic investigation began. They literally were scouring that park. Turns out this man had been stabbed once in his stomach. And the autopsy later on would reveal that the wound had perforated through the stomach and his bladder, and that he would have had he did have massive blood loss, and that he would have passed away within a minute. So it was very quick. Predominantly, the search was for a murder weapon or any evidence that could identify the killer. The victim had his wallet and phone with him, so he was easy to identify because he had ID with him. He was identified as Daniel Young. And what blows my mind with this case is that it was rush hour, like 8:07 in London. You know, it's a hive. And while his body was found like relatively quickly, it turns out, nobody saw the attack. There were no witnesses. No one heard anything. There were no eyewitnesses. And the park on each side has houses that overlook the park. So it just blows my mind that nobody was seen running away or with bloody hands or holding a knife, like nothing. This person just murdered somebody and then just walked away. While the park was long, sort of rectangular, obviously the people that designed the park, they made it so it was more interesting to the eye, and there were shrubs and bushes and trees, and the path sort of winds, and there's benches, and there's sort of added curve, if you like, to the park, which meant there were places in the park that were more secluded than others, and the police quickly thought that that's what had happened here, that somebody was waiting in the park and that they had chosen a spot where they were least likely to be seen. Daniel still had all of his belongings, money and everything, so it was not a mugging or a robbery. And he also had no defensive wounds. So his injury was to his stomach, and it was like either he knew who his attacker was and somebody he trusted and allowed them to get very close to him, or it was a very quick, sharp, sudden, unexpected attack. Daniel's family were informed about his death quite quickly because he was able to be identified very quickly because he had his ID and stuff on him. And they were over 200 miles away in Devon. That's where he was originally from, and he'd moved here to London for a job. this really resonated with me because I have actually been in a very similar situation and been hundreds of miles away when something very tragic has happened and you're not there, and it's like time goes so quickly but so slowly all at once when you just like want to get there and you're not there. So I really like have a lot of empathy with the family in this situation, and after reading that in this case, I don't know, it just felt really, it touched me. Daniel was a bright, happy soul. He had been murdered on his way to work, and this was only his second day. He had bagged a deal as a university lecturer, and he was really, really excited about it. Friends and family would say that Daniel was such a kind-hearted person. He put others before himself. He was always there. He was reliable. He was loyal. He loved to travel, but at this point in his life, he was 30, and he had decided coming up to his 30th birthday that he was going to plant some roots, hence his new job as a university lecturer. Daniel's house was incredibly close to the park, to Kendall Gardens. So it was a very, very obvious cut through for him to the tube station to get to work. CCTV saw him walking to the park at 7:57 a.m. and his body was found at 8:07, so that's 10 minutes. As the investigation continues, the investigators get word that there has actually been another stabbing earlier that morning, earlier. So they had no idea about this. It wasn't a fatal stabbing, and the victim had been taken to hospital. This was 23-year-old Camille Burlat. He was a builder, and he was about a mile away unloading his van when somebody came and attacked him from behind. And he was stabbed in his bum, in his buttocks. Why? I just find that bizarre. Like I say, he survived his injuries, but he was taken to hospital. This happened about a mile away from where Daniel was murdered, and it was about an hour before Daniel was murdered. This has suddenly got a bit spicy because it would seem like there is a person on the loose going around with a knife attacking random people. Not what you want at all. So all the while this fingertip search is going on, and they eventually uncover a knife, and it's partially sort of buried and hidden. I have a hair. It's partially hidden, sort of buried in a thick, undergrowth in the park. For some reason that surprises me, because from what I read, it seems like the person made an effort to hide and hide the knife. Why would you? I guess that you don't. I guess. I mean, I'm no good at this, am I? Because I don't go around doing this sort of thing. But I guess you don't want that knife on you for very long, so the sooner you can discard it, the better. But it has so much more chance of being found if you discard it in the place where you committed the crime, wouldn't you think? Yeah, maybe, I don't know. Anyway, it was in the park. It tested positive for blood at the scene, but they obviously didn't know whose blood and what have you, so off it goes to the fancy lab, and it was determined that the blood, there were two lots of blood. One was a match to Camille and the other was a match to Daniel. Murder weapon found, tick. They also found DNA on the knife that did not belong to Daniel or Camille, and they put this DNA through the database. So if this person has been arrested before or in trouble, then they will be in the database. And what do you know? That was the case. A bum bum bum. Match. The name that came up was Mark Loveridge. He was in the database for attacking random people with knives and iron bars when he was 21 years old. And this is where I just feel like the whole thing is a tragedy unfolding in front of your very eyes. Mark Loveridge also suffered with very severe mental health issues. These mental health issues led him to have violent tendencies, and he had been under the care of the NHS for his mental health for many, many years. But he had also then been discharged. He was a heavy drug user, cocaine, cannabis, amphetamines. And he was also on antipsychotic medication. So he was diagnosed with a number of mental health issues, and some of these needed this medication to keep him under control, I suppose, is that what you would say, or keep him level. He had decided to stop taking that medication. On numerous occasions, he had gone willingly, volunteered himself up to the NHS and to A&E, and he had gone and desperately wanted help for himself because he said he just couldn't, he was struggling to ignore the voices in his head, and it would seem like he would just be moved along. His own family were absolutely terrified of him. So were people that he worked with. Anyone that knew him was very scared of him, and they knew that he was not all right and he was dangerous, and they knew this and they were scared. And his family had tried for years and years to get him the correct support for his mental health so that he could, live in the community in a safe way. But they were just fighting against the tide, and it would seem like this support never really came. The police went to arrest Loveridge at his home. He wasn't there, but he was out walking his dog nearby. So they found him. And calm as cucumber, I do believe, he tied up his dog to a lamppost and then proceeded to try and attack the police officers who were trying to arrest him. And that didn't go down very well. So he was rugby tackled and then he was taken in. He didn't behave any better when he was in custody. He barricaded himself into a cell. I don't know how. I mean, I thought they just didn't have much in there. But anyway, when they eventually tried to get in and got in, he then got his little friend out and started weighing on them. Delightful. While he was refusing to talk to the police, they looked at his phone records and stuff like that, and the phone signal showed that he was at the park at the time of Daniel's murder. It also showed that he had sent a text message from the park to his employer to say that he was going to be late into work. Eventually, Loveridge began to talk, and he just claimed his innocence. He said that the police were framing him, even though they had his phone records and it showed he was at the scene, and they had the knife with his DNA and the DNA of the two victims. He said it wasn't him. That story would change somewhat when things got closer to trial. The defence said that they put in a case for guilty but with diminished responsibility, saying, he was not in his right mind at the time. They also said that he had stabbed the men, but that basically those men, he just had his hand out with a knife in it, just casual, and they walked into it. Basically, it sounded like that's what they were sort of trying to say. Good one. Experts found that Loveridge was suffering with paranoid schizophrenia at the time of the murder. In his assessments, he showed no remorse. He admitted that he had stopped taking his antipsychotic medication and that his mental health had declined since he had stopped taking it. He said that he had started to hear voices and that those voices were telling him to get ready, and that on the day of the murder, the voices told him that the next person that was going to walk past in a certain direction in regards to Daniel's murder, they would be stabbed, that he would have to stab them. The court accepted these specialists and, his diagnosis, and they agreed that he was not of sound mind when he committed the murder. So he was given a life sentence, and he was sentenced to serve that, to start with, in Broadmoor Hospital, so that until he was well enough to be transferred into prison. I find that one difficult, because if you are sentenced and you committed the crime while you were unfit, mentally unwell, if that's what they have said and that's how you committed the crime and that's what then I don't understand why you then have to be moved into jail. And I think it does more damage. I think it causes more damage for those people when that does happen. In cases that I've read where they then get moved into a prison, they struggle massively. It's I find it really difficult, because it's they give these people the support to a point, and then they're like, oh, is it money? Is it more money to have people in in a psychiatric hospital where they're receiving possibly, maybe, I don't think they're like the greatest of places, but I think they receive therapy and an element of care because they're not mentally well. I do find that difficult. I don't know. Chat to me about that. What do you reckon? Before we wrap it up, during the investigation, on the day, right, on the day of the murder and the attack on Camille, another phone call was made to 999 reporting another stabbing, right? This blows my mind. This blows my mind. Makes me angry. This was the worst fear, that this guy, whoever it is, guy or gal, is out and about in the world, randomly, attacking, murdering, stabbing innocent victims. So this third call that comes in, it's like, oh, high alert. Can you imagine? Police officers and investigators and all of the people involved in these things are human beings. So this is like a highly intense situation. Not good to then get a third phone call. They then send lots of resources to this scene of this third stabbing. I say that because when they arrived, there was no stabbing. There was no incident. It was a hoax. What the actual? Now, yeah, people are stupid and people do things like that, But when you hear why, it blow your mind. The police didn't just drop that because they'd used time, resources when they are trying to investigate a murder and a possible serial killer on the loose. So they traced the phone call of the hoax and they find the person that made that phone call. And I'm so glad. Although it then wasted even more time and resources because they went to this person's house, they arrested that person, they took them in for questioning and they had to search his house because, who's to say a lot of times in cases the perpetrator gets themselves right in there, don't they, with the case, and they sort of make themselves known. So that could have been the case. So this guy could have been their killer, just, being a weirdo, like ringing up. Stranger things have happened. So they had to go and arrest him. They had to search his home, and they put a lot of time and resources into this Wally. Absolute plonker. What's that word that I said I was going to use and I hardly use? Pillock. That's the word. He was a pillock. I hope they charged him with wasting police time because what a Wally. And you know why he did it? It was a hoax. He had nothing to do with the case. He did it because every morning he goes to the park to do his martial arts. And he was cross because the police officers had closed the park to deal with the murder. I have no words. I have one. Pillock. Something that shone through just so brightly in this story was Daniel's family and his brother Tom in particular. He has gone on to, there's charities and organisations that are seeking to, what do I mean, better the situation for people with mental health issues to be supported properly so that these things do not happen as often, because it is a very shocking state of affairs. There is not enough money or funding. It is a hugely underfunded service. There are people with incredibly difficult and dire mental health situations that are left to live in the community, in society, with absolutely no support. And that is what happened here with Mark Loveridge. Daniel's family, his brother, they were so kind-hearted and wonderful, lovely people. When they knew the story, they were worried that other people might be hurt and might have not been able to seek medical assistance, or that their bodies weren't found yet. And they were worried about that other people had been hurt by this man. I find it crazy because I do cover these cases and sometimes it's like a bit dark when I'm researching, especially when I'm trying to pick a case. And then there's always a light in the darkness. There's always the flip side of these horrible things that happen. There's always people involved who are just beautiful, kind, wonderful souls, lovely people that are just understanding and compassionate and loving. And even Daniel's family have showed compassion and understanding towards Mark Loveridge, and they campaign for things to be different. 5 years after Daniel was murdered, the NHS did a review, and in that review they admit fault. They say that risk management was inefficiently carried out, despite the fact that Mark Loveridge himself had reached out to the mental health services on numerous occasions to say that he was thinking of harming others. They also noted that it was not good enough or efficient that they simply wrote a letter to Mark Loveridge to suggest that he take his medication. Like, what are you going to do? They promised to make changes based on their findings. And there certainly needs to be more care in the community, like actual people helping people live in the community, rehabilitating people in communities. But it's just labour intensive and it doesn't happen. So they send a letter. Don't forget to take medicine. Bye-bye. That is all I have on today's case. Sadly, there are so many cases like it as well. And it is truly a tragedy. Hope you're all having a wonderful week. Enjoy the weekend. I am in essay writing hell again. Do you know, I've got an essay due every 3 weeks until May. I'm just going to be so boring. Like, yeah, boring. It's crappy. I don't like it. I had a really nice half term with the kids and Paul, and we went away for a little bit. It was fun. And I just got in the zone of like holiday, and it was great. And now I am like, and the week before I couldn't see, could I? So I was like proper slow and basically didn't do anything then either because I was like impaired. So what is that about? So now I find myself in a situation where I knew that I had an essay due every 3 weeks, and now I'm like 2 weeks behind on both of my modules. And it's my fault. Don't you hate that when you've only got yourself to blame as well? Because I have. It's literally my doing. Well, cut yourself a break, Sophie, actually, because the eyes, that wasn't your doing. Half my doing. Anyhow, no point dwelling. It is what it is, and here I am. So between now and May, end of May, this will be my refuge from the madness. That's good though, isn't it? Hey, sister, soul sister, but sister. I don't know. Is that marmalade? See. Anyhow, I'm going to love you and leave you. Have a beautiful weekend. I will see you next week for another true crime story. Love you, miss you, really want to kiss you. See you next week. Bye.